The deadline for ICE officials to release migrant children held more than 20 days inside 3 separate detention facilities is today. 182 children are being held with their parents, and at least 100 of them are allegedly past the 20-day mark. But the judge is already warning they may not be released immediately. Camilo Montoya-Galvez is here to help us understand today's deadline. He covers immigration for CBS News and joins us now. So, Camilo, are we expecting to see these children released today? And if so, what happens to them once they are out of those centers?
Yes, good morning, Vlad and Anne-Marie. While we may see some families released in the coming days, most will continue to stay in Immigration and Customs Enforcement custody, despite this deadline that you mentioned by a judge in California that gave ICE until today to release all minors who have been held in the agency's custody for more than 20 days. Judge Dolly G. of the District Court in Los Angeles said that her deadline is effectively unenforceable currently because the avenues that she gave ICE to release these minors who are protected under the landmark Flores settlement agreement have not materialized. Because of this, it is likely that these minors will continue to stay in immigration detention. As of last week, there were 182 children in ICE custody, Anne-Marie and Vlad. 83 of them are between the ages of 0, so we have babies in there to 5 years old. There are teenagers in there as well. 100 of them have been held for more than 20 days. And I note this because there is ample scientific and medical research that has found that detention is harmful to children. We have a quote here from the American Academy of Pediatrics. Expert consensus has concluded that even brief detention can cause psychological trauma and induce long-term mental health risks for children. There is no evidence indicating that any detention is safe for children. The United Nations Refugee Agency came out with a strong statement last week saying that civil immigration detention should never be used on children. And lastly, I want to offer you a quote from a migrant mother whom we spoke to last week, who described the impact that 11 months of detention have had on her 8-year-old boy. She told me, "When he speaks to someone now, he just stands idle. He no longer answers like before when he would talk to anyone when asked something. Now he doesn't. He just stays quiet and puts his head down." She also told me that he has nightmares on a consistent basis about being separated from her. So these are, the consequences of detention.
That is truly heartbreaking. But if the very judge presiding over this case is saying, yeah, I got a deadline, but you know what? I don't know how you enforce it. Then you got to wonder, what is ICE actually obligated to do? Is there anything that is enforceable that they have to adhere to?
Yes. So to answer that question, I can explain why the judge said her order is currently unenforceable. She provided 3 reasons. She gave ICE 3 ways to release these minors. One is for ICE to release the parents and the children together. That is an authority the agency has, but it is one that the agency has said in court filings that it is not planning to take. So that option is not available. There's the other option of the children being released to sponsors without their parents, with their parents' consent. That has not materialized because there is no process in place for parents who want to take that option to do so. And obviously there's strong opposition from immigrant advocates for this option because they say it is inherently coercive, involuntary, and that it leads to family separation. The third option is for another court, separate from the one in LA, to order the release of families. That has not happened. Indeed, a judge in DC last week refused to release families on the basis that their detention did not violate their constitutional rights. And so that is the state of play right now. But ICE, as you mentioned, Anne-Marie, regardless of all these rulings, still has a binding obligation under the Flores settlement agreement to seek the prompt release of children in its custody. But of course, the problem always has been that these protections do not extend to their adult parents.
Mm-hmm. So, Camilo, let's talk about those children that were being held at a Texas Hampton Inn. I know we spoke to you last week about this. We now know that Hilton says that those children are no longer being housed inside the hotel. what do we know about where they've been taken? Is there any concern that they may be lost within the system, given the administration's record, which we spoke about months ago, the administration's record on relocating children?
Yes, Hilton indicated last week that those unaccompanied children no longer were staying at this hotel in McAllen, Texas, but ICE has not said where the children are. We have repeatedly asked the agency about the children's whereabouts, but have not received a response. An ICE spokesperson did tell us that because of security risks, they do not typically identify the location of people in its custody. But the broader issue at play here, Vlad, is that unlike the children who are being detained with their families who we were discussing previously, these are children who arrived at the border unaccompanied, and they're being processed under a CDC order that is allowing virtually immigration officials to bypass the asylum and anti-trafficking protections that these kids have enjoyed for decades and to rapidly remove them from their home countries. That is what is happening here, but to answer your question, we do not know where these children are.
Okay, let us remind people, when you talk about the protections, there are laws on the books. We've talked about the Flores settlement before when it comes to minors and their ability to seek asylum. Remind people what the law is, because people, people use sort of the phrase illegal aliens or whatever, but there are laws, and when these children come to the border and cross the border and seek asylum, they're following our laws.
Right, that is a very important point. U.S. asylum law allows anyone who has set foot on U.S. soil, regardless of whether they cross the border without documents, to seek safe haven here, including protections like asylum or withholding of removal. That is another protection. Unaccompanied migrant children in general also have even heightened protections than adults. They are allowed to request asylum through a non-adversarial setting, not in a courtroom, but rather in front of an asylum officer, unlike adults. And they are also typically supposed to be transferred to the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which oversees a network of shelters and other housing facilities where these minors can stay while their asylum cases are adjudicated and while they await to be released to sponsors in the U.S. who are typically family members. Those protections have been effectively suspended during the pandemic because the Trump administration has said that all migrants, including children, pose a public health risk to the country, that they could potentially spread the coronavirus inside holding cells and in the broader U.S., and that they should be rapidly removed from the country without the chance to have an asylum hearing, a day in court, and to be transferred to this refugee agency. So that is a seismic shift.
Yes, it is. Camilo, as usual, always really appreciate your reporting. Thank you so much.